Welcome everyone and happy 2021. Thank you so much for being here today. I am Abigail of Abigail Ogilvy Gallery, which is in Boston, Massachusetts. This is our first Zoom event of the year and a very fun one for me because I am joined by my art world mentor and dear friend, Meredyth Moses. Hi, Meredyth.
Hi, Ab.
And for many of you on today, I know she does not need an introduction, but since we do have some new folks who haven't met Meredyth before, I will read her bio for you. Meredyth Hyatt Moses opened Clark Gallery in Lincoln, Massachusetts in November of 1976. Moses owned and directed the gallery for nearly 30 years. To this day, she remains an active participant in the contemporary art market, organizing art treks, visiting galleries and fairs, independently curating, and staying in touch with art world peers. Her criteria for exhibiting art are simple and direct: quality, interest, and understanding of medium. Guided by her refined and experienced taste, Moses selects pieces by local artists, which are both aesthetically distinct and cohesive. The resulting collection attests to the quality and diversity of fine art in Boston. Welcome, Meredyth. Thank you for being here with me. How are you? Tell us where you are.
I'm in sunny Vero Beach, Florida, never dreaming that I would become a Floridian. And actually, I'm not. I'm a displaced Bostonian who loved being warm and loved the sun. But Ab and I met a long time ago when she was just 5 years ago. And are you sure that I was 82 5 years ago?
No, I redid the math. We were 80 and 26 at the time. So it was 6 years ago.
Okay. That's much, much better. But, I wanted to thank you, Abigail, for letting me get back on the art stage, which you all know who know me well, I love. But Zoom makes me nervous. I'm a little less nervous today because our beloved grandson, John Coddington Moses, married Abigail Rosenfeld in June in LA on Zoom. And so I had the experience of being the grandparent there at his wedding, and that's a non-tradable experience. And I want to thank the state of Georgia today. You've renewed all of my wonderful feelings, and Stacey Abrams particularly for all the work that she has done in behalf of getting the Democrats, hopefully the second one, in, but at least we have one solid one, and that's incredible. So I just think we'll bat it back and forth.
Yeah. Well, and I think a fun way to get started is, here we are, two people. How did we meet? We met at an in-person event, which of course people don't have the opportunity to do right now, but we have these great Zoom events where, like this one, we've brought together people from different countries all around the US, many Bostonians. And you and I met at an Artists for Humanity event that you had curated and spoke at. And then our dear friend, mutual friend, Ross Chanowski, connected us and said, I think you two will hit it off and get along. And then you quickly brought me around to Boston, told me who to get in touch with, showed me, the dealers that you had in your life and the peers for many years. And I think that's really important to you. And that's really important as to why we're even, doing this here today. We can't forget about the history of Boston or the greater art market. So that's something that I know you really wanted to speak a lot about is, the history of it. In 1976, what was happening when you opened your gallery?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you bring the word mentoring into it because all of us always have a mentor or more. And I've been on this amazing journey of life, loving my life from the beginning, and meeting my husband while I had just finished my program at the Yale School of Nursing, and moving back to Cleveland, where he was going to finish his residency. And 3 kids were born to us in my 20s. I was raising my kids. I was a happy mom, but some ingredient was missing. And my whole life, I had been very involved with thinking about the visual world. And John, my husband, was always very supportive of, why don't you take some courses? But when you have 3 little kids in 5.5 years, it's a little hard. But by the time I was into my 30s, I was then very engrossed in studying art in any way I could. Dealers don't go to college to become dealers. They go to college to become educated people. And then you figure out how you're going to be a dealer, and if a life takes you that way. And so the person that was my mentor in the late 30s of my life was a woman named Eleanor Clark, who was our across the road neighbor and the chair of the social service department at Mass General Hospital. And she had been studying with me. I had been teaching all over the Boston area, particularly at De Cordova, in with kids in our own school system. She looked at me one day and she said, "You should own an art gallery." And I thought she was crazy because I had never thought about a business. I was very happy doing what I was doing. But something that she said, and the fact that I had been educating myself in New York, all the way down our fabulous area of Boston, and going to museums, going to galleries, wherever I could to learn. I was a street kid. I learned on the street. I learned from all the fabulous people that were my mentors all those early days. But in any case, I decided to do it. And we together decided not to open in downtown Boston on Newbury Street, which was a very strange decision to a lot of people, but not to me, because I had looked at the map and I was very clear that all the communities that surrounded me in Lincoln would be people who went to Newbury Street, who were interested in learning more about art. So and also there were these beautiful new buildings that had just been built in the village area of Lincoln. And they were patterned after Gropius, who lived in Lincoln for much of his life when he came to the US. And so we did it. We signed a lease, and on November 15th, 1976, my life changed forever. In that space was the making of me as a person, and as I grew as an art dealer, and as I learned more and more and more. And I'm sure all the peers on Newbury Street used to say, "Well, how does she do it way out there?" But Lincoln was already a community that was very art oriented. I was always involved with De Cordova. Much of my education came from the school at De Cordova. And so it seemed like a natural thing. We were living in Weston then, but we soon moved to Lincoln and renovated an old barn that we will always miss all our lives. But it was time to move.
And I think, I mean, that's something you and I have talked about before, that being an art dealer is a really unique, I mean, I think there's so many paths to get there. And I get the question all the time, did you always dream of owning an art gallery? And to me, that's such a funny question, because I don't know, what 7-year-old is saying, oh, someday I want to own an art gallery. Like, that just doesn't seem
Right,
like
right.
the dream that you would think of. And it certainly didn't come to me until it did. And then it, like you, I mean, I think I was scrappy and finding answers and meeting people and going to things and asking questions and attending the fairs and self-educating quite a bit. I did have the art history degree, which I know you said you're the street kid who didn't.
You weren't a street kid. Well, I had a home when I grew up, but I became a street kid because I was pretty, devoted to teaching myself everything that I could. The interesting thing is that when I did make the decision to open the gallery, Eleanor's brother, James H. Clark Sr., who was a masterful 20th century, mid 20th century collector and lived in Dallas, Texas, adopted me too and opened my doors to ateliers where it was print time. It was the 70s. Everybody was selling prints. Painting was there and always would be and always will be, but the prints sort of took over because it was a whole new medium. And so we would go to these wonderful, very famous ateliers, and they would lay prints of David Hockney and Klaus Oldenburg and Jim Dime and a slew of other people. And I would come back and we would get them framed and put them up in a installation and sell everything. But the missing ingredient was I didn't have anything to do with the discovery.
Yeah.
And at that time, I realized that we were losing some of our great Boston artists to New York constantly, because they could not afford career-wise to stay in Boston. And when Catherine Porter and Greg Aminoff left in those early 80s, I just really decided that the Boston scene was going to be where I concentrated. I sold out all the prints. I even sold a couple of my own, made a lot of money in the resale, which was cool because I would need it from then on, and then set out to explore places like Fort Point Channel and visit as many artists as I could. Actually, in Fort Point Channel, in those very early days of the 80s, there were 3 galleries. Nobody wanted to go with Pamela Clark Cochran, my assistant director, and with me, because they were scared to go down to Fort Point Channel. But in those buildings, there was a wealth of artists. Of course, they mostly are gone now because the buildings were rehabbed and made into condos for rich people. But the artists found other places. Anyway, yeah, so, that's what we did. We self-educated, as you said, all the time, looking, choosing, only the Boston area, or I would say the greater New England area, because I was so deeply involved with De Cordova and because their mission was New England. I became exposed to artists throughout New England, Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, and certainly Massachusetts.
And I think that's an interesting point, that I think that Boston artists still have this feeling that maybe they should be in another city, but I actually disagree. I think in today's world, and I've had artists that we work with that are in Boston that actually came from a New York and said, I went to New York City, but in today's world, given the rent prices, I was living so far away from the city. I was barely interacting with other artists like I thought I'd be. It was harder than I thought to get in touch with gallerists, and I wasn't making the connections I thought. So they might as well live in a city that makes more sense, like a Philadelphia, a Boston, maybe a
You're
Chicago, and do their work there. And they could really establish themselves and do very well. So I think that's something that has changed, but maybe not in our minds yet. I think people still think a little bit, they question being a Boston artist, but you really
really,
can be.
yeah. Well, it's interesting. Once the fairs started and I would always take a group of people with me. That was the fun of it. Take a group of good friends, the collectors that I had been developing, who were interested in learning more of the whole national scene and the international scene, because it wasn't just America, it was Europe too. But we would travel to, for instance, Chicago in the beginning, and have a great time going through the fair. I always made an arrangement, a financial arrangement, that if they were going to buy, that I would get a percentage because I'd act as their dealer. But I never charged them for going and looking. And we began to see Boston artists emerging in that fabulous arena. And I was so excited the first time I was with a beloved client and we saw Aaron Fink. And I thought, and then when I got on the little jitney bus to go back to the hotel, all I heard was Aaron Fink, Boston, Boston. And I thought, yeah, we finally arrived. But it took a lot of work on the part of 13, 14 of us gallerists, all down Newbury Street first. And then when it got too expensive in rents, a lot of them had to move and they went into the leather district. But they weren't there very long before they moved on to SoWa, which is south of Washington, to mimic Soho. We didn't want New York to get away with anything, but we were Nina Nielsen, Barbara Krakow, Portia Harkes, Tommy Siegel, Arthur Dion later, and later also were fabulous other people that joined what we established, which was called BADA, Boston Art Dealers Association. Do you belong to it?
Yeah, we're members and it still exists, established in 1989, I think it says on the website.
Of course, Alpha Gallery now with Joanna Fink running it. Alan Fink was one of my mentors. He always answered any question that I had, always wanted to share information about all the artists that he represented. And he did start pretty early to represent Boston artists. But also there was an interesting guy who came into the fold. His name is Stefan Stux. And at that point, I think we all realized that we had a responsibility to begin to develop collectors to collect the Boston art, because the collectors mostly went to New York and beyond. But it was always a great thrill of mine that people that I love so much, like Stephen Payne and Graham Gunn and many others, came out to Lincoln, where they grabbed a cup of coffee in the cafe and then came in to work me over for getting a discount on buying the art. But they always knew they were going to get some kind of special discount because they deserved it. They were supporting people emerging from school and then buying major art all over the world. And that I admired so much.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, that's the biggest part of being a dealer that maybe doesn't get talked about enough, is that when the art is purchased, sure, it supports our gallery, but what's more fulfilling to us is writing those checks to the artist. I mean, every check, even established artists are excited about a sale and excited to be supported. There's a person out there in the world that connected to their work and felt like it could be in their home and in their life. And then, yeah, I mean, the Boston artists, especially, I think when there's that connection of someone locally wanting to support a local artist, it's really
I'm glad that you brought that up, because for me, in taking on a new young artist, not only was I very, very conscious of being responsible for their career and moving them out of Boston and into other national galleries wherever I could, I also was just mesmerized by wanting to keep them solvent, to have money coming in constantly that they could count on. So that was a big responsibility of taking them on as a career artist. And whenever we traveled personally throughout the States, I made sure that I got to know dealers in other places, because I think if no other word describes me as a dealer, I think collaboration is my shtick. I was willing constantly to collaborate with anybody and to take less myself so that my artists could move forward. And that was a big part of me as a dealer. But also, I took a very big personal interest in developing collectors. And so those collectors, all those people who never dreamed they were going to collect art, became best friends to this day, and depended a lot on my eye and about what I said. So the most important thing that you and I do is never, ever to lie. Not to an artist when you go into a studio and they are so eager for you to love their work. And you know the minute you walk into that studio, whether or not you're going to take them on. You're always kind and you're always helpful, but you don't always take them on. You tell the truth. And then you suggest other places where they can go, because we all have sort of an aesthetic. What's yours when you choose art? What is your aesthetic in choosing?
Well, it's interesting because reading your bio, it makes me think about the way that we look at artists at our gallery. I mean, it's not necessarily that there's an exact science or an aesthetic that we particularly go for. We do show a lot of painting. That's something that I love. And maybe that stems from having a grandmother who was a painter and her paintings in my home growing up. But it's a little bit of that artist having that it factor. You know, you walk in and you can tell that they love what they do. They're passionate about it. They know exactly why they do it. And they're not doing it. You can sometimes tell when an artist is sort of choosing a color or a style because they think it might sell well. And that's all the wrong reasons to create art. You want to create art because you love it and you're really passionate about doing it. And then what comes next is really that magic. Is there's everyone can see it. The second you see the artwork and hear the words about it, you know that that artist has something special going on and will continue. I mean, we want artists who want to have a long career. We can tell that they're going to stay passionate about what they do and will work as hard as us, I think, is also something I'm looking for. And will, be there by our sides while we hopefully can get them into art fairs and museums or other galleries, and maybe they move on from us someday. But that's all really exciting. I mean, they should be growing.
It's a very exciting thing when you're out and about in New York or Chicago or down at Basel here in Miami, and the dealers yell out, "Hey, Meredyth, hi." Well, I just love impressing all the people that are being taken with me that particular day. And they say, "How do you know all these people?" You know, because you've worked very hard in getting known as a responsible, reliable, pretty creative art dealer. And that's what you've been doing. And I've watched with.
I feel like there's a little bit of it, and maybe it's that Boston attitude. I think I share that feeling of excitement, now that we've gone to Spring Break Art Show, which is a New York art fair a couple of years in a row, and we've done Volta, which is in New York a few years in a row. There's something even that we're the Boston gallery that now these other curators know, these other dealers know, that, it's a really fun connection, and you kind of feel even more excited about it.
When we settled on being full-time people here in Florida, because in the beginning we were 6 months trying to make the decision. And when we were 6 months in Boston, we gave up that fabulous old barn and we moved into the city, into Fort Point. And I became fascinated by Artists for Humanity, where these young artists are these young people, not even artists yet, who mostly kids of color from the inner city, where Susan Rogerson and all her staff work so hard to keep them off the streets and to keep them interested. And many of them most of them go on to college. Not all of them become artists, but they become good people. And the first time that John and I walked down the street to explore, what is this place I've never had the time to really think about, I stood on a balcony and looked over into the painting studio, which is this huge room filled with young people. And they were every color of the rainbow, including white. And they were gabbing with each other, and the music was blaring at full force, and they were painting because their teachers were teaching them. And I thought, this is how the world should be. This is how everything should be. And I put a lot of work into a few years at Artists for Humanity. And as you're saying, that's how we met that first time, because I had curated a show from their student body. And Susan was clever enough to have a big thank you for Meredyth and John having moved into the city. And she capitalized on all the people that came to be at that party. And I'm so glad that many of them have supported that wonderful organization. And by the same token, when we came here to Vero full-time, I thought my life was kind of over in that as far as the art part of it. And I was so wrong. because I renewed some fabulous friendships with one of my artists, Gus Miller and Jan Miller, and they introduced me to tons more. And I did some pop-up shows, and I became fast friends with an artist you should look at named Tim Sanchez. And but I won't do that to you today. And then I had a reason for being. I could take groups to their studios, help them with their sales, have a pop-up show that tons of people came to. I didn't even know that I had that many friends down here, but my community is very special. It's called Bay Tree. And many of the people, after they came into our house for the first time, were startled by how you can live with this much art. And that's true. I startle myself sometimes with how much I live with, but because I'm very eclectic. I like so many different disciplines. I love painting. I love sculpture, both in clay and glass and metal. I love Haitian art. I love African art. I learned a lot from Tim Hamill in the African art that he and his wife Bobby own. And, I think that's something that's very inspiring uh, to your constituency, because they not only learn one thing, they learn a lot.
Well, and I think that's an important part. I mean, it was something that you said to me early on, is to continue to go to the other Boston galleries and see who they're showing, check out their shows every month. Continue,
Every month.
yeah, continue to go to other cities. I mean, I love, back when we could, visiting LA and seeing how brightly colored all the artwork was there, and New York and what was changing and happening there. And I think that's why it's also a little hard to answer the question about the aesthetic of the gallery, because I think it'll always slowly change as things change. Is that how you felt it was for you, or did you pick up a roster of artists and kind of keep them?
No, it changed constantly with my taste. Julie Burnson, who worked with me for years and now, and at Cordova, fantastic, talented woman. She and her mom, Beverly, had such an eye for outsider art. I never even had heard that word. I didn't know what outsider art was, or visionary art, but they took me down to New Orleans and I learned, okay, and I became passionate about it. By the same token, and I had many shows of outsider work. And then by the same token, emerging in the Boston area were studio furniture makers. And Arthur Dion at Gallery Naga at that time, he and I used to second guess each other all the time about who we were going to get and who we would show. And finally, we made the decision one day to meet for lunch and to make a deal. And here was the deal: that we would collaborate completely, so that artists didn't have to choose between, Newberry Street and way out there in Lincoln, where everybody was very happy, actually. And they could be in both places. And that what we would do is, if I was hosting, I would split my commission completely, and we would, with him. And that didn't feel so good at the end of a show when you sold a lot of work and you had to send him a check. But it felt terrific when he sent me the check. And so we became fast friends for life, and also collaborators. And I want you to think about that also in your pursuit of educating yourself about what everybody else is showing, you look for people that you can work with. And when I was ready to sell the gallery after 28 years, it was because I had forever been asked by clients when we would deliver the art or they'd be talking to me about the art, what should I do about this room? Should I move the couch? Should I move the rug? Should I do this? Should I do that? And I thought, you know, I have another little career that I'd like to pursue. And so I sold the gallery to Pamela Clark Cochran, who had it for 10 years, and then she sold it. And it's still going in its 45th year. But in fact, which is pretty remarkable. But in fact, I loved doing the design work because once I got into someone's house, they were cooked. We became friends first, and I always could figure out where something could fit. And I could help my fellow dealers by taking my clients by the hand in my wonderful little Saab first and then a Volvo, and into town to them to buy art. And that was a wonderful way for me to sort of end my career, if you will, in Boston only, because I still have it down here. But anyway, and you asked me a question, Abigail, when we were chatting in the beginning of our talk about this, and you asked, how did you, what did you do about making the gallery into a place where people wanted to come? What do you do about that?
Do you mean, were we talking about like collectors coming in or?
No, just the general populace and collectors. Yeah. How do you?
I love hosting events. So of course these pandemic years are sad for us and we hadn't, planned them. We've been open 5 years now. Our first year we hosted somewhere close to, I think 80 or so events. Some weeks I hosted 3 events in 1 week and, was dead tired, but had the same amount of energy at each event because they just were so much fun for me. And it didn't matter if it was art people or people planning to buy art.
Yeah.
When people walked in the door. So we did flower arranging classes and we did all sorts of things, or, corporate events would ask if they could use the space, which, then is a fun way. They're in the door and all of a sudden they're talking about art that they've never seen before, or they're saying, like you said, oh, I didn't realize there was this big arts district in Boston.
Yeah, right.
And
right.
I think in maybe the second or third month of the gallery, I was sitting next to a woman outside of the gallery, outside the arts district, just had met her for the first time. We were chatting and said what I did. She said, I've only been to the South End galleries one time. I can't remember which gallery it was, but it was for this event. And she said the event. And even though she didn't remember the gallery, fine. It was music to my ears that someone had gone to SOA that wouldn't have been there before and hadn't thought to. And we say at every single one of our events, there are, 20, 30 galleries in this area. Come back to First Friday, whether you buy art from us, buy art from someone else, or just look at the art. That is supporting the arts. And
yeah, I think
that's
that's very, very terrific. And I made the gallery into kind of a community center since we were in the rural area anyway, and they could stop in at any time and bring their kids. That was very important to me. And I remember when I would walk with my kids, I didn't ever want people to be as nasty as many dealers, like for instance in New York, were to me. They had no idea who I was. And if you asked a question, it was like, oh my God, they have to answer a question. And so I stopped talking to dealers in New York that I didn't know. If there were young people sitting behind a desk, all dressed in their black and looking the part, I didn't talk to them either. And I felt really good about it because but if I asked about a particular artist, immediately they would hop up and hop on me. You don't do that. You make it into the kind of space that everyone wants to come to experience the visual world, to schmooze, to tell you their problems, you tell them yours, you share everything. One of the other little side things that I did in the gallery was Julie, I think, was the one that turned me on to it. And that was artist junk jewelry, in that I say junk with great love. It wasn't made out of junk. It's just that it was very affordable. So we had 2 or 3 drawers of the jewelry, and we always had a pre-Christmas, our salon show during the month of December was what everybody waited for, because through the year I would go to gallery to studio, choosing the one piece that I was going to put into that salon show that represented us, the gallery. And then my installers, of 3 fabulous men who knew so much about installing, David Hannon and Jonathan Stangroom, whom you still use,
Yes.
and Tim Kadish. They were all great, and they always offered an opinion, which many of the times I took because they were so clever. But in fact, you know, that brought everyone in. They waited for that salon show, and we would put on a fantastic food extravaganza as well. And never in between, mostly just cheese and crackers or nuts, and that was about it. But at Christmas, we went all out. And so we would have the jewelry sale first. So, and that would be 2 or 3 days before the salon show opened. And they would pull open these drawers, and many of them would buy like 6 or 8 pieces to put away for Christmas presents. And all of a sudden they would look up at the wall and they'd say, oh, I love that painting. And then I had the, okay, you know, and I never forced anyone to buy anything, but I am known for lots of encouragement. Only if I think it's right. Only if I know their space and I think they're making the right decision. I never, ever wanted to make a mistake about that.
Well, and buying art is a big and important decision, no matter, you know, the income of the person buying it. I mean, I think this past weekend, we just had someone come in who had just recently gotten their first job a few years ago and had been saving up for a certain artist. I actually know he's on today, and I don't know if he even knows yet that that piece sold, so we should shoot him his email. But you know, that's where the magic is. It's like, it doesn't matter who the person is and you know, what their approach is to buying art, but it is a big deal. So it is something that has to be talked through and figured out. And I know you do this too, or did this too, or maybe probably still do, is bring the artwork to their home before they even think about buying it, to see how it'll look and see if it'll fit, and see if it'll fit with their family, and see if they feel like it's the right thing for them. And maybe
Right.
it's not. And then, you know, you find something else, or you don't get the piece.
Right, right. Yeah. And I appreciated so much when you first opened, and did I curate the first show that you ever did?
No, you were a year in. So we opened in 2015, and a year later we had
Oh,
an
oh,
eclectic view by Meredyth Hyatt Moses, and
yeah,
we had your show.
right, right. And we did very well in that show too. Yeah, it was just going back to all the artists who had interested me through the years and choosing a piece. And of course, we had to collaborate frequently in that show because they were in various different
Yep.
galleries. But anyway, what else do you want to know?
Well, and I know this is a lofty question, but I'm wondering, I mean, do you have words of advice or anything that you would ask of this generation of art dealers? Is there something that in this changing world, and here we are with
Oh,
more
yeah.
access to the internet and all of that, what is it that you would ask of the next generation of people selling art?
I have enormous faith in all of you young people, and particularly you as a gallerist. I think that you have been so strong through this terrible, terrible time of the COVID pandemic. And, what is a gallery? It's a space where you can walk in and just take your time learning and asking questions. And nobody can do that. Well, if they do, they have to wear a mask and they have to be one or two people at a time. And, it's so different now. But you have the technical ability, you young people, to carry on, to never, never, never allow Boston to fade, to stay with it, Abigail, and to also develop a market in Europe. You're in Switzerland. You'll be able to go to the original Basel Fair, and you will be able to acquaint yourself with all kinds of different dealers. And you take your artists and other artists of other dealers to Europe with you, and spread our gospel of how wonderful it is to live and work in the Boston area.
Well, and I mean, I don't know if it's just a testament to Boston artists or really artists everywhere, but I was unbelievably impressed with my artist's response to this very different and unique year last year. The artists were quick to jump into doing online shows, which we had never done. We didn't know if anyone would show up to these little.
But you have the technical ability.
Yeah.
And that's the difference.
I think that's something that you said to me once, and it's how I feel as well, is every action we're taking is on behalf of our artists and to get their work out there. And how much the artists stayed optimistic this past year kind of showed in the great online shows we were able to host and the fun chats we had with them, where I mean, one of our artists, I think he was doing school at home with his 4 kids that are under the age of 10 and still was able to make the time to do this Zoom event and be lively. He actually accidentally hung the painting behind him upside down, but we'll forgive him because there was a lot going on. And I think that's what's really, I mean, it's unchanging that the artists have to stay just as optimistic as we are, no matter what. I mean, pandemic aside, galleries have good years and bad years and things like that. So you're getting a phone call?
Yeah, no, yeah, not a client calling. Yeah, I think, you have a very tough job ahead of you, but I believe that you all can do this, and you must do this because the artists cannot survive without that kind of support. So I have high hopes for the galleries to return to some kind of normalcy when we all get 2 shots in our arm, which is not an easy feat down here in Florida, I might add, even when you're this age and my old man's age. And it should be. There should have been a wonderful way that America did do this. But in any case, we will all march forward. And I'd be interested in knowing if any of the people who have checked in have any questions. How can we ask them if they have any questions?
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll have to wrap it up soon just because of time. But one person did ask, do you
Yeah.
have any point of view of how has the internet or social media changed the business compared to, let's say, the 80s and 90s? What are your thoughts?
Okay, so it's more instantly gratifying, but not nearly as much fun as we had. I think, the computer was just coming into its own when I started the business. And if I didn't have my wonderful Jeannie Moulton, who ran the business aspect of my company, I never could have survived because she knew how to do everything on the computer. Me, I looked at slides. I visited with my feet and my eyes each artist, and it was fun. It was great to see their environments and to know more about them, but and to know their families. But I think technically we are always going to be moving forward, and you are in exactly the right place to do that. You now are living in Geneva. You don't know how long, maybe forever, maybe not. And you're running a gallery in downtown Boston. That's crazy. But you have superb help, and you were traveling once a month at least. And now you can't do that because you're about to embark on the most important job you'll ever have, Abigail.
Yes, Meredith is referring to the fact that I am currently 9 months pregnant.
And thank God she didn't deliver today, okay?
A little risky, the date we picked for this event, but.
But, my kids were already grown when I started the gallery, but they've always been the most important job I ever did in my life, is to have the children, to develop our children, and to see them come into their own, and their children to come into their own. Being a grandparent is the greatest gift. So you're going to have to wait a while for that, but your mom and dad know already about it. And are you going to, well, in any case, so
we'll chat later about that.
Yeah, right.
But I think what you're saying is, and it's something that maybe is a good way to end, is, prior to the conversation about the raising of children, is that, so I think in today's world, my perspective is, I think that there's amazing tools out there to view art online and maybe do your research online, but we still find that people they want to come into the gallery and see the artwork at some point, or have us bring it to their home so that they can see it in person. They're more often than not, they love meeting the artist. Our last show, Wilhelm Neusser did an amazing job of making himself present, so that although we couldn't do an opening, he was there nearly every single weekend of the show. And the number of people that accidentally walked in and met him and heard him talk about the art, and that's why they bought it. I mean, that's exactly what we want to have happen. And that's the whole magic of it all. So those things are still happening. We're still optimistic, pandemic or not, that, people can make connections with artists and see the work in person. There's certainly online sales that happen sight unseen, which is, that's the way the world's working now. But I think seeing art in person is important to everyone. I think that's still happening.
Yeah, and will always happen. Yeah.
And something that I think I saw a webinar recently where a woman she was like the CFO of a venture capital firm in Boston, and she was talking about what the definition of success was to her. And I think it applies to both of us. Success to her was walking in, having the opportunity every day to walk in and do a job that you love. And I think that that level of personal success, regardless of how hard the day is fulfilling.
I think that's a lovely way to end this conversation, Abigail. And I just wish you tremendous success and stay healthy, both of you, all three of you.
Yes, we have a second host here. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. We can't believe how many people signed up and turned out for this. This is so much fun having you. We loved all of your notes in the chat. We've been watching them come through. And Meredyth, thank you so much for joining us and giving us your time.
Thank you for asking.
All right, stay well.
Bye-bye.